Without further ado, I would like to introduce very briefly our guests. First of all, Victoria Hoy. She's an associate professor of political science at the University of Notre Dame. She also serves as the academic advisory. She also serves on the academic advisory committee of the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. Our second discussant is Michael Davis, who is professor in the law faculty at the University of Hong Kong, and he joins us directly from Hong Kong at a late hour that is now out there. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, I would first like to start from the question to Michael, who is a constitutional scholar and has followed civic organizing in Hong Kong for almost 20 years. We oftentimes hear from Chinese officials that protesters are undermining rule of law in Hong Kong, why actually the Hong Kong authorities are upholding it. So who is right, Michael?
Okay, well, this is a complex question. I think it's better to start, assuming the audience does not all know that much about Hong Kong and its constitutional system, with the idea that Hong Kong has been set aside within China as an autonomous region, and it's called a special administrative region. And this was something that China and Britain sort of cooked up together. The Chinese, by amending their constitution, having a new constitution in 1982, which provided for the idea of special administrative regions. And then this was carried out in a treaty in 1984 called the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And that treaty itself provides for one country, two systems, which is sort of the model that applies to Hong Kong. This is kind of an asymmetry. Some people would say, well, why is Hong Kong treated so special? Well, Hong Kong already had many of the freedoms and rights and the rule of law that this treaty provides. So the idea was to maintain that, and that this would be a benefit to China and to Hong Kong, okay? And so the Hong Kong people, when they first heard that they were going to be returned to China, there was a panic in Hong Kong. And China actually released some of its policies, in 1982, and the Hong Kong people were very worried about the future. So this treaty was negotiated, and when the treaty was released, people were really excited and happy. They were actually 178,000 copies of the treaty were released, and they were snatched up right away. Some people even reported that copies were being sold. So this was kind of a relief for Hong Kong. So the treaty is taken very seriously. Promises one country, two systems, a high degree of autonomy for Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong. And it has all kinds of guarantees about rights. Most of the rights, in fact, there's like 16 rights listed in the treaty. Half of them are free speech. So it's very...
So do Hong Kong people have a right to protest or engage in civil disobedience under those?
Well, they have a right to protest. They have very strong right to free speech. And so the treaty provides for this. It provided for the existing legal system, the rule of law, and so on. All of this was stipulated into the basic law. And so the Chinese, when they wrote a basic law, were not writing on a clean sheet of paper, but rather carrying out their obligations under the treaty. And the basic law contains all the same things. It provides that the ultimate aim is universal suffrage for Hong Kong. The tone of all of this and the emphasis at the time when all of this was done, both when the Joint Declaration was signed in 1984 and when the Basic Law was issued, was this encouragement for Hong Kong people to put their hearts at ease, not to worry. And the Chinese government took the treaty and the Basic Law to the capitals of the world and convinced countries around the world to treat Hong Kong specially. So this is sort of grounded in very solid foundations. And of particular interest, I think, in the treaty is Article 45, because that's exactly what's being disputed right now. And that article includes some idea of gradual and orderly progress towards democracy. China had withheld democracy, really much progress at all, until now it's talking about it. So it's saying that there could be universal suffrage in 2017, which is 20 years after the handover. But the Basic Law in Article 45 said the ultimate aim is selection of the chief executive by universal suffrage upon nomination by broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with democratic procedures. This has become the source of tension. China wants to use or control who's in the nominating committee and then it wants to require 50% vote in the nominating committee, and then limit the number of candidates that committee can nominate. The net result of all of that, as Hong Kong people understand it, is to exclude the democratic forces in Hong Kong, in effect, in this very pro-Beijing committee, to ensure that only candidates approved by Beijing are submitted to the voters. So they claim this as universal suffrage, but Hong Kong people don't believe it. They don't view this as universal suffrage because they think universal suffrage is more than one man, one vote. If universal suffrage was only one man, one vote, then China would have universal suffrage because all people in China can vote. So the people in Hong Kong are upset about this, and they view it as an attempt to sort of manipulate the outcome. It's important when looking at these two documents and to appreciate that, among other things, this basic law incorporates the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So Article 25 of the International Covenant also applies in Hong Kong. So when you have this idea that we're going to vet candidates in a sort of Iranian-style model, the Hong Kong people are outraged, and they think that, in effect, Beijing is violating the basic law. And so this gets to the question, the second part of your question, the rule of law. The other day I was talking on BBC, I was asked to sort of debate a leading figure in China on the issue of the rule of law, and he says those protesters are breaking the rule of law. And he gave a diatribe for a long time that I finally got him a word edgewise. And I said, you know, the rule of law, they may be breaking the law because civil disobedience involves breaking the law. That is not getting a permit. But the rule of law, you undermine it. And it's the rule of law. It usually refers to how the government is subject to the law, that it rules according to the law. And so in Hong Kong people's view, it's the Beijing government that's taken liberty with the notion of universal suffrage that is undermining the rule of law. And he says, well, then if that's the case, you should take it to court in Hong Kong because Hong Kong has the rule of law. And then I pointed out to him that Beijing has also issued a ruling that says the NPC Standing Committee decision is binding on the courts of Hong Kong. So there's no opportunity to challenge it. Can't challenge it through democracy. You can only challenge it on the street. And this is where the civil disobedience point comes in. Civil disobedience is by definition breaking the law, but many people in the world have appreciated that when there's a lack of democracy and there's no other way to control your government and express your wishes, that civil disobedience, even if illegal by definition, because that's what it means, breaking the law, can be legitimate. And I think Hong Kong people are taking this view, and that's the source of the protest.
But then, you know, despite all these limitations that you described and these encroachments of the Chinese government on the rights of Hong Kong people, the mainland Chinese they do ask, you know, whether Hong Kong residents are justified to go out and protest whether when they already have so many actual rights and economic freedoms and prosperity. The actions the mainland Chinese would indicate they can jeopardize what they already have, and they have much more than, in other words, whatever the privileges they have enjoyed those privileges and rights much more than the people in mainland China. So what do you say to this?
Well, I think the problem with it is they don't understand that why Hong Kong people are afraid is that the autonomy that Hong Kong has is the secret to all of this, that the rule of law in Hong Kong exists, but it doesn't exist on the mainland. And as that question I mentioned a moment ago shows, it's not quite understood on the mainland. Even now, the party is having a plenum where they want to talk about the rule of law, but everyone in Hong Kong knows that this means a discussion about party discipline rather than the government being subject to the law. So it sort of turns the rule of law as we know it on its head. And so Hong Kong people appreciate that the autonomy, the high degree of autonomy that's promised, is very instrumental to maintaining Hong Kong as it is. And this is very much important for China. In some ways, I think China is showing restraint in reacting to the protest because it realizes the cost would be enormous. You thought Lehman Brothers collapsing would be a serious problem. Imagine Hong Kong collapsing. It's sort of like New York collapsing. Out here in Asia. So the danger that's present, a lot of mainlanders don't understand. Although mainlanders are very happy to come to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is widely admired on the mainland, and it's one of the major tourist destinations. Hong Kong, in fact, has so many mainland tourists that sometimes people complain about it. So I think the country at large has gotten used to the idea of this special administrative region, that while China tries to help Hong Kong along the way sometimes, Hong Kong has been an enormous benefit to China. In fact, 3% of China's trade and investment is funneled through Hong Kong, and Hong Kong has had a major role in China's modernization. And this is why the leaders have been tolerant and even created this model. So the model, though, presumes that Hong Kong people will defend it. And if the Hong Kong government is not up to the task, then I think the people on the street have proven time and time again that they are.